Just in the nick of time. Man, okay, we're gonna get started. Today's probably gonna be, there might be 2 whole days in this semester where I'm gonna kind of lecture a little bit. And today's gonna be one of those. And then at the very end, I might throw in kind of a lecture day too. So most of the other days we'll spend working on your guys' problems and projects, okay? So, but today, again, the first couple chapters are kind of introductory chapters and also to get you reacquainted with accounting and whatnot. We'll kind of go over a few of those things. Then on Tuesday, we'll go ahead and get started on your chapter 3 assignment, which gets into some of the Excel types of things that you guys will be doing pretty much all semester. So, okay. So bear with me today. Sorry, I got to put you through that. I don't prefer lecturing all that much either, but sometimes it can be kind of fun. Feel free to jump in anytime, ask questions. I'll probably get off track sometimes and start talking about weird things that are going on in the economy right now and different things like that, because those all affect finance, which does make it kind of interesting. So. Well, I put this up as a reminder. I don't know what's going to happen. Is anybody in here in BPA? Yeah. Yeah, and Lanny has typically been the advisor for BPA, and he's out yet for a bit, and so I don't know what's going to happen. But I usually put this up just as a reminder. It's a great organization, and they usually end up taking a trip every year and go to a competition, and our students have done rather well at the competitions, and what a great resume builder, for people that want to be in the business area. So something to consider, and it's not just for business students. Anybody can join the BPA, and still gives you some bona fides no matter what you might want to get into. So something to consider, but you might have to check around and see who's in it. I'm not 100% sure. And again, Lanny's going to be out for a while, maybe when he gets back, depending on what kind of shape he's in. We'll see. So relationship between finance, economics, and accounting, right? They all kind of mesh together. And economics is a key thing. We got all kinds of weird things going on in the economy right now, right? We're maybe technically in a recession because we've had 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, which is oftentimes the technical definition of a recession. But we've never had a recession when the unemployment rate was 3.5% either, okay? And there's, I think the last statistics that were out, there's 11 million jobs unfilled, yet in the United States, people aren't working that could be working, okay? So it's kind of this weird, we're in this weird economic environment. We're also in an environment where interest rates are rising. The Federal Reserve, you guys will hear me talk about the Federal Reserve some. Oftentimes the head of the Federal Reserve, the chairman of the Federal Reserve where we're at right now, that guy's name is Jerome Powell, oftentimes called J. Powell. And they often call him the second most powerful man in the world. Second most powerful person in the world, because previously it was a female, Janet Yellen, because they have a lot to do with the economy of the United States, which is obviously still the biggest economy in the world. And right now they're raising interest rates. Well, why are they raising interest rates? It's an attempt to slow down demand, okay, and slow down inflation, because we're in a big-time inflationary environment. We're still a long, long ways from where we were in the late 70s and early 80s. I started my banking career in 1984, and the first loans that I gave were over 20% for like a car loan. Okay, the very first loans, consumer loans that I made were over 20%. We're a long ways from that now, and I don't think we're going to get anywhere close to that. You could get CDs back then if you had money to deposit, your savings. You could get CD rates that were double digits, 12, 13, 14, 15% even, probably got as high as. Try that now. Anybody got a savings account? What's your savings account paying? Have you looked at the statement lately? I'll bet you it's not even 2%, would be my guess. The last statement I got on mine, I think it was 0.5% or something like that, so, yeah, yeah. Rates are still pretty low by historical standards. But that's partly because we went through a period of very, very low inflation, right? And so rates, we were able to keep rates really low for that. So anyhow, those things all have a lot to do with finance. I talked a little bit about that on Tuesday, how you got to make decisions based on where you think, those things are going. Give you an example, Apple Computers, or Apple, the company Apple, probably has somewheres around 200 to 250 billion dollars in cash on their balance sheet. Okay, well, what do they do with that cash on their balance sheet? Okay, do they invest that? Where can they invest it? What can they do with it? There's all kinds of different things that they've got to try to plan for. Okay, now while they have 200, 250 billion dollars cash, they also still, I'll bet you I could find some Apple bonds, meaning that they are borrowing money. So why are they borrowing money when they got that much cash on hand? It's kind of like the example I gave you with my house. Apple's got a AAA credit rating, I'm pretty sure, and they can probably borrow money at less than 1%. It's probably a little higher than that now. In fact, I know it is. It's closer to 2 or 3% that Apple would probably have to pay. But a year or two ago, it was probably around 1.5, 2% maybe, given their rating, their credit rating. They actually have a higher credit rating than the U.S. government, if you can believe that. I think there's 4 or 5 companies in the world that are rated AAA. In the U.S. back in, right after the Great Recession, we may have bounced back up, I'm not sure, but we went down to AA, I think AA minus or AA plus or something like that. There's a couple different rating agencies, and so, and they use a little different scale, but they're pretty similar. So, accounting provides financial data, right? We got income statements, okay? That tells you what you've done over the last month, quarter, year, whatever the case may be, right? Generally a year, okay, or at the most it's a year. We used to, at the bank, we had a daily statement of condition that we'd get, okay, and so we looked at it every single day, both at the income statement and also the balance sheet. And in bigger organizations, you'd probably do that. In banking, there's just so much going on every day. You kind of want to look and make sure that nothing, got posted incorrectly. Every now and then you'd be reading through it and you'd spot something, you'd go, oh my God, and you'd holler at somebody, what happened? And generally it was just a little mistake or something that happened. Statement of cash flows then is extremely important because we got to know if we're generating cash. Ultimately, we all need some cash, right, to operate. So those are the statements that you guys will work on for Project One, right? Your income statement, your balance sheet. Basically, your sources and uses is kind of a beginning balance sheet, and then you'll have an ending balance sheet that'll be there as well. That'll actually do a balance sheet for the first 3 years projections that you're going to be doing. So finance links that economic theory with the accounting numbers. So we take into consideration those things that are going on in the world. Interest rates are rising, okay? What should we do? What if interest rates start falling? Okay, then what should we do, right? Do we want to be borrowing money then if interest rates are falling? No, we want to wait and borrow it when the rates get down, right? Okay, we wanted to borrow money 2 years ago and we could get it for really, really cheap. Okay, sorry, we can't go back in time though now, so. Um, there's some truth to this cartoon that I think some of our financial malaise or economic malaise that we might get into sometimes is because we just generate bad media, bad, whatever the case may be. And it can cause, I think, actually, if you pick up we don't pick up newspapers anymore, but if you open your computer and start reading the news every day and it just talks about how bad things are, pretty soon everybody, what do we all do? We all suck it in then, right? So we're not going to spend money, we're not going to go out as often, we're not going to buy that car, we're not going to, and then all of a sudden, we kind of have fulfilled our own destiny there and created a situation where we can be in a little bit of a slowing economy. So, there's no doubt, coming out of the pandemic, the economy was roaring there for a little bit, and there's no doubt that it's kind of slowing down, partly because of some of the Fed policies, and some might argue the government policies as well, but partly just because that's just kind of the way it is sometimes after you come out and you have that big rush for a while.
It still makes your butt pucker when you go to pay your
Oh.
retirement account and you go to the bottom of the screen, because I put several $100s a month away in retirement, and all of my accounts at the bottom of the list, and all of them show red. They're
Yeah.
all negative.
Yeah, yeah. It's my brother-in-law. I always get a kick out of him, and he's 70, and so he always complains. Oh, I should just take it all out. I should just go buy a pickup. I should, he just goes on and on about that.
I'm
And I
sitting
said,
there thinking I should just call my lady and tell her, just FYI, I'm not gonna put any money in for the middle of September, the first of October, I'm gonna cut it to the credit card, because I'll give myself better interest.
oh, exact wrong philosophy.
See, that's what that's she's gonna say.
Now is the time. Okay, now is the time to be getting after it. Yeah, yeah.
I know,
I-
but I'm still paying 20% on my credit card, so.
I'll give you my example in the Great Recession, and most of you were too young to remember the Great Recession much, which was 2007, 8, 9, kind of in that area. And I was teaching full-time then, and we have a deferred compensation plan that we can put money into. Well, the market was just tanked. I mean, it was just ugly. Lynn Stilger, he used to teach here, he'd come into my office every day. What do I do? What do I do? I said, well, so if you got cash and you got cojones, you buy, every day he'd ask that. Well, anyhow, so I had a little income coming in the fall from another source, and I didn't need my paycheck for a month or two, and so I just went over and had them put it into the deferred compensation program. It wasn't a lot. I think I did it for 2 years, maybe just 1 month for 2 different years. But if I showed you what that was today, you'd just be astounded. Even with the market down now, it's so far up from what it was, 10 years ago, or it's been more than 10 years. No, yeah, more than 10 years ago. So, it's just astounding. So, yeah, sometimes you gotta suck it up. Oh,
I
yeah,
only put 7,000 a year into it,
right.
so that I could take November and December off. Don't get one of those. Do not get one of those.
I'm not big on insurance, like whole life insurance or any of those types of things. No. You're, in general, if you're thinking about investing, I think when you're fairly young, first married, you got a family, you need life insurance, absolutely. You're young and you're first married, you can get a term life insurance policy for dirt cheap. If you're 25 years old, you got a kid and a wife, and you want a $200,000 life insurance policy, it's gonna cost you $10 a month or something, okay? Now, if you get a whole life insurance policy, they're gonna want, several $100s a month. That's gonna add an investment component to it. You're gonna be way better off spending the $10 a month and then putting the rest into your IRA, like Mary Ann's doing.
That's what I told my son.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Well, okay.
Yeah,
I'll give you a horror story after class when you tell me about those.
I tell you that it's better than nothing, the people that don't save anything, and there's way too many of them, okay? But there's better alternatives. And IRAs, both traditional and Roth IRAs, and we'll probably talk a little more about those as the semester goes on, but, that's one of the greatest gifts that the government has given us, and, traditional IRA is just like a 401K too. They're virtually identical, just 401K is something that your employer offers you. No greater gift. IRAs, they're gonna continue to compound returns for you, tax deferred, until you take it out. And then Roth IRAs, you put them in, then everything's tax-free, okay? The difference is your traditional IRA is pre-tax money, and so you're not paying taxes on that money now, okay? Or you're deducting it from your income, actually. Whereas a Roth IRA, you have to put the money in after tax, but then it grows tax-free forever. And your IRA, you have to take out once you get to be 72 years old, you have to start taking it out. A Roth IRA, you can keep I know you guys aren't even thinking about that now, okay? Believe me, I'm starting to think about that. You know, I gotta start making some plans for that kind of stuff, cause it's a little ways down the line yet, but it's coming up, so. I know I woke up in the middle of the night a couple of years ago, I started thinking about required minimum distributions that you have to take when you turn 72 from your IRA. I'm gonna have to pay taxes, that sucks. Anyhow, in the early 1900s, you know, finance emerges as a separate field. You know, we had accounting, you know, we had economics, but, you know, what's finance? You know, who's gonna keep track of everything and tell us what we should do and where we should go, those types of things. Part of that's probably because we were starting to develop some more technologies, maybe a little bit, so. Financial practices revolve around this, capital preservation, and, as individuals, we need to worry about that, right? What we're doing for our savings, you know, if we're buying our house, building equity in that, those types of things. And it's the same with companies, okay? But, you know, can a company have too much capital? Oh, hell yeah. Okay? If a company's hanging on to too much capital, the rate of return for the investors is probably going down. Okay? It's less risky. Okay? You know, Apple doesn't have a lot of risk if they got $250 billion, you know, in the bank, but you know, also, as an investor, you're looking at that saying, you know, maybe that money could be better invested someplace, because Apple's probably just buying some government bonds with that or something. Anyhow, liquidity maintenance, we gotta have cash. You gotta have cash if you're in business. You gotta pay the bills on a monthly basis, and you gotta, just like we do, you know, our household bills and everything, right? Reorganization of financially troubled corporations, that is oftentimes happening. I think there was a company that just filed a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, I thought. Shoot, now I can't remember what it was. I should have brought that to class. I should have wrote it down. And you have that bankruptcy process, okay? And there's different types of bankruptcy. There's a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which is a full dispersal of assets. It's a total liquidation, they call it, okay? Everything gets sold. Whatever money's there goes to the creditors. My experience in the banking, if we got 10 cents on the dollar, we were lucky. Okay, and I would guess that that's fairly typical. There's also bankruptcies that are called Chapter 11s for businesses, and those are a reorganization, meaning that the business will stay in business, okay, but they adjust some of their debts. They might write down some debts a little bit. You know, there's a judge that oversees that, and they try to keep the business going. Northwest Energy has been through a Chapter 11, okay, and yet they're still our energy provider, mostly aside from the co-ops around here. They're our energy provider for Montana mostly. Okay, you get the eastern Montana, I think it's Mondac, but so they went through a Chapter 11, and there's some other companies that you're probably familiar with, you know, that have gone through Chapter 11s in the past. So in the 50s, it became more analytical. We were starting to get calculators, right? So things like that are, back then they weren't calculators. What were they? Little 10-key adding machines, I guess they called them, right? But that made life a little bit easier, right, for doing some of those things. So we started to worry about, you know, capital, right, financial capital. What do we use to purchase real estate or long-term assets? You know, and that's you want a combination maybe sometimes of debt and equity, okay? You're gonna hear me say this several times probably in the semester, that debt's always cheaper than equity. I know that may sound a little bit odd, but debt's always cheaper than equity, okay? Now, that said, I mean, if you could finance everything with 100% debt, you probably would. Believe me, I had a lot of people come to the bank and they wanted to start a business, but they wanted me to fund it 100%. That's just too risky, right? It's too risky, and so that doesn't happen very often, if at all. Okay, so while debt's cheaper than equity, you're always probably going to have some of that equity, right? Okay, cash and inventory management. The inventory thing has changed a lot in the last couple of years. It's really been interesting, I think, to follow it. So we went through this period of, let me go back. In my day and age, you know, when I worked at retail and I was going to college, okay, you had to have a lot of stock on hand, right? And the reason for that is because when it was time to order, you literally, back then we had these tag systems. So if something was getting low, you know, on the peg that was on the wall, you'd pull a tag or a couple tags or whatever, how many you wanted to order, put it in an envelope, put that in the mail, send that off. Somebody would receive that someplace, probably 2 or 3 or 4 days later. they'd have to put the order together, somehow figure out how it's gonna get shipped to you, probably along with a lot of other stuff, right? And so it took weeks, okay, to get that inventory in, right? Now, you know, when I go down to the hardware store down here, I'm checking out and they got the little point of sale thing, it scans the little barcode, boom, guess what happens? That item's automatically reordered. You know, as soon as I buy it, there's an order that goes in. Actually, the manager does review it every night. I've asked him about that. So he reviews that order sheet every night, make sure that, you know, that's what they want. But it's automatically reordered and it's probably there in 2 days, right? So we went from, you know, this old inventory system. Well, guess what we had to do back then? We had to make sure there was a lot of items on the shelf, okay? You know, especially things that moved pretty quickly. You had to always make sure you had 6 or 8 or 10 of them on the shelf. Now they got 2 or 3 on the shelf, right? Okay, because they can get them back in. It's called just-in-time inventory. Well, now all of a sudden your cost of inventory goes way down. It goes way down, okay, which is it's a big deal. But what happened this year? Now all of a sudden you start reading reports of ships that are outside of LA Harbor that can't dock and they can't unload and businesses can't get inventory, okay? And that went on for quite some time. Well, guess what's happening now? I was listening to the quarterly reports from a couple of the major retailers, Walmart and Target both. Guess what happened? Well, because the supply chain got so backed up, they ordered lots of extras like we used to do back in the old days. Well, it finally got there, and at the same time, the economy's kind of slowing a little bit. So now all of a sudden, Walmart and Target report that they've got too much inventory on hand. They might actually have to start doing some discounts, which might be good. That might put a little downward pressure on. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But their pump stuff is empty.
And it's different things that are like that, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
check it out, walk through the grocery section at Walmart.
Oh, yeah.
It will scare you if you're a foodie.
You remember the toilet paper shortage with the pandemic? Oh my God, you'd go into IGA and they were selling single rolls if they had any for, I forget what the price was, you know, but it was nuts. Just crazy, yeah, so, you know, that world has been turned upside down a little bit in the last, you know, in the last year or two. Well, you know, it's gonna calm down and it's gonna get back probably a little bit more to that just in time. That's my guess. I hope I'm right about that. That's a little bit more, a little easier for the businesses to try to plan and do those types of things, but. Okay, the capital structure theory, that's the debt equity thing that I was kind of talking about. Dividend policy, okay? Some companies, big companies, pay dividends and others do not pay any dividends. Utility companies like Northwestern and those types of companies are famous for usually paying pretty good dividends. And that's because their income's fairly stable, right? You know, they're gonna get monthly income from us, we gotta send them checks, and they got a pretty good idea what that monthly income's gonna be. And so they usually pay out a pretty good dividend. Fast-growing companies that usually don't pay any dividend. Okay? And the reason for that is that they want to put money back into the company. Okay? Amazon, if you went back 15 years and you looked at Amazon's financial statements, they didn't show any profit forever, and yet their stock price was going through the roof. Okay, and it's still doing pretty good. And Amazon's still not paying a dividend. Yeah, they're probably still growing enough.
But their stock prices are going up, so your,
Oh, yeah.
so your equity is in the stock is going
Yep.
up, the dividends.
Yep, they were showing virtually zero profit, okay, for years and years and years. They are showing a profit now, but that's because they were putting everything back into growing the company, okay, and doing that hugely. One of my favorite companies is Berkshire Hathaway. I don't know if you guys follow Berkshire at all. Warren Buffett, he's like the sixth, he used to be the richest man in the world. Now he's only sixth richest. He's only worth like 100 billion or something. Just turned 92 years old. Okay, yeah, he just turned 90. You know what his salary is every year? 100,000. That's all he pays himself to run one of the biggest companies in America. He pays himself 100,000. You know, when I say he pays himself, he's got kind of a controlling interest in it, right? They've never paid a dividend. Okay, if you want to, if you're on your computer, type in BRK.A and just see what that stock is selling for. There you go, $418,000 per share. Now, oh yeah, yeah, $12,000, not percent, but $12,000, yeah, yeah. Or Warren, he was probably worth 110 billion. Now he's only worth 100 billion. And so, yeah, cool story. But Berkshire Hathaway's they've never paid a dividend. Okay, you can also buy, so you know, because I have a little bit of that. You can also buy as Berk B, BRK.B. Okay, and it's a little more reasonable. It's 300, a little less than $300 a share today, I think. So. And part of that was what happened, he wasn't ever going to do that, but people that had mutual fund companies told him back in the 90s, they said, Warren, if you don't make your shares available to more common investors, what we'll do is we'll just set up a mutual fund that has nothing but Berkshire shares. And so he created Berk B. Even when that was introduced, it was $1,000 a share, okay? Which wasn't too bad. I bought 2 shares originally. Well, it has since split 50-1, and they had to do that when they bought the BN Railroad. So Berkshire Hathaway owns BNSF. Berkshire Hathaway owns Dairy Queen. Berkshire Hathaway owns Geico Insurance. Berkshire Hathaway is the biggest investor right now in Occidental Petroleum, the biggest investor in Wells Fargo, and the biggest investor in Apple Computers. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting, yeah. It's fun to read. Warren, he's a folksy guy, lives in Omaha. His partner, Charlie Munger, is, I think, 2 or 3 years older than him. They go to work every day still. My brother just sent me a thing. I'd read it before, but it's kind of cool. It said, Warren looked up, he said, the age that people die the least frequently is age 6. So he said, so we need to live like 6-year-olds. So I eat like a 6-year-old. He says, sometimes I have Oreos for breakfast and on and on. He owns Coca-Cola, Berkshire Hathaway. I'm sorry, they don't own Coca-Cola, but they're the biggest investor in Coca-Cola. So he drinks Coca-Cola every day, Oreos for breakfast, drives himself to work every day. His salary is $100,000 a year. He pays $50,000 of that back to the company because, well, just in case he made a copy of something or did, use some of the business resources for his own personal use, he wants to make sure that he doesn't, there's no impropriety or anything like that. Yeah, he doesn't need a salary or anything. He lives in the same house that he bought in 1956, I think it is. And it's just, you can look at pictures of it. It's just it's a nice home, but it's not, certainly not a mansion. It's not like these $12 and $15 million mansions that people live in. Yeah, that's part of it. He hasn't spent a lot of money on stuff. He obviously just reinvests it. What he tells you is that that's what he loves to do. He just loves doing that, and so he does. So, stock buybacks. Companies buy back their own stock, okay, and they do that pretty often. There's been a big trend, actually, of that kind of recently, where there's huge dollars that get bought back. Microsoft has famously, they've been on a roll for 10 or 12 or 15 years now, buying back their stock because they're loaded with cash too. Okay, Apple, even though they got that much cash, if we got some time, I may take a look at their financial statement and we can look it up and see. But Microsoft, they've been buying back, every year, 10, 20, $30 billion worth of stock. Okay, what's that do? Well, it limits then the number of shares that are outstanding, and so presumably everybody that keeps their stock then owns a little higher percentage of the company. It should make the stock price go up then, right? Because you're dividing, the value of that company between fewer shares outstanding. So, and that's what those two things, the dividend and the stock buyback, that's what companies do when they're loaded with cash and they don't know what to invest in, right? Okay, and some of that's very, very smart. Warren Buffett, obviously, he knows what to invest in. That's why they've never paid a dividend. I think they've done a limited stock buyback, but not very much, okay? And the reason for that is because he's the best investor in the world, so hang on to the cash and keep investing it, right? I don't want to get any money back from Warren because he's way better at investing than I am. So keep your money, Warren, keep my money, and just keep investing it, right? Because you'll do a way better job of it than I will, so. Yeah, true, but they wouldn't be 5 cents today, I don't think. Organic apples, I don't even know what apples cost now. It's just, huh? Yeah. For a pound? Dang. It's about apple season though, because fall time's usually kind of apple season, they say, so. And I like a good apple. And they do make better apples nowadays than they used to. They're crunchier. Used to get too many soggy apples, and I don't like soggy apples. Huh? Yeah. But my, make you guys feel bad, my wife's taking off for a few days, go spend some time with her mom, but she did bake me an apple pie before she left, so. She got up early this morning when it was still cool and baked me an apple pie. Good wife. So, modern issues, right? Risk, return, okay? Risk and return always go hand in hand, always, okay? So, if you're listening to the people trying to sell you an investment or something, and they say, hey, we promise you, we're gonna get you 17%, okay? That's gonna be risky, okay? If they're promising you that, that's gonna be a risky investment, just guarantee it, right? Okay? They go hand in hand, right? A guaranteed investment right now would be a government bond, 10-year treasuries are at 3.25%. 2-year treasuries are actually about 3.5%. That's called an inverted yield curve, okay? Almost never do we have an inverted yield curve that's not followed by a recession. I don't know if you can find an instance where the yield curve got inverted that we didn't have a recession kind of during or after. I know it. So the National Bureau of Economics, something has to decide if we're in a recession or not. And like I said, this is a weird situation because we've never had this kind of a slowing economy in an environment where the unemployment rate is 3.5%. I mean, 3.5% is considered maximal employment really because you've always got people that are transitioning, between jobs or quitting one, they're off for a little bit, and so they might show up on the unemployment, but they'll be back at it, so. Maximize return for given risk levels. So we all have to determine, what kind of risk we're willing to accept. Personally, for you guys that are young, okay, you guys, if you're doing your 401k and whatnot, and you're sitting there and you're deciding, because usually they'll give you 5-6 choices, and you're deciding, should I take this one like a small cap index fund, or should I take this large cap, growth and income, those types of things? Take the small cap index fund. That's going to be the riskier one. You got 40 years. I can show you charts in over 40 years. Small caps are going to outperform mid caps and large caps just about always over a 40-year period of time, right? You get my age, you start thinking, maybe I want to be, because that small cap's going to be volatile. Like who was talking about, Mary Ann was talking about, you open up your statement and it's all red and whatnot, and you go, crap. Yeah, that makes you a little nervous. And small caps will make you a little more nervous, okay? You're going to wake up some mornings. Best thing is just ignore it. Put it aside and just ignore it. Wait till you're my age, and then you can start kind of looking at it and saying, now what am I going to do, Portfolio management. Again, this gets back to what do you do with that excess cash? When we were in banking, bankers have deposits and they lend money, right? We usually lent pretty good. We were usually close to 100% loaned out. But as we got bigger and whatnot, that kind of changed, and we started to get more deposits than we could lend out. Well, what did you do with the extra money? What's Apple do with their extra money? What can you do with those types of things? And typically, those need to be safe. In the bank, they had to be safe investments because we had to be able to access that if we needed to. Okay, if all of a sudden we got a demand for a bunch of loans, we had to have money that we could lend to them, right? And so we had to kind of have access. So we were typically government bonds. Boy, do you do a 2-year bond? Do you do a 10-year? Do you do, what do you put it into? And so a lot of that, it takes a lot of thought to go into those types of things. And again, capital structure, we kind of already talked about that. So new products with focus on hedging. What's hedging? You guys, any farmers in here, ranchers? A little bit, Brandon, yeah. They understand hedging, okay? It can be very, very simple. For example, if you forward contract your wheat, technically you're hedging. Right, or you forward contract your cattle, your calves, technically you're hedging, okay? And there's quite a bit of that that goes on. You know, I used to tell a lot of customers that, you know, oftentimes April, May was the best time to sell grain. Say, sell your grain, forward contract it, you know, get it sold. I said, and then if you're worried about the price going up, go buy it back on paper. So you could do a hedge. So you'd sell your grain, you're gonna get, you know, $5 right now, it's about 9 or 10 bucks a bushel, right? So you get 10 bucks a bushel for it. You can go on paper and you can say, I wanna buy a call option for the fall. It cost you 20 cents a bushel, 30, whatever it was, okay? But then if the price happened to go up to $15 a bushel, you'd take advantage of that. It'd cost you that 20 cents a bushel or whatever. I had a few customers that would do some things like that, you know. And those are legit hedges. I'd also get some customers that would speculate, and that would always make my, make me cringe a little bit, and I'd usually run, okay? So, you know, it can be, people do speculate, you know. If you know, we're in a down market right now, you know, you could buy some options on the market as a whole, and, you know, if it went up, you might profit big time, you know, you're leveraging your money, multiplying your money, if that makes sense, on your returns there, but it's also a gamble, okay? Most option contracts expire unused, right? So people that are buying these options never exercise their options typically. I think it's like 80% or something expire unused. Again, if you're using that as a legitimate hedge, that's great, that's fine, but if you're speculating, a little different. There we go, inflation, that word, that nasty word. I haven't been able to talk about inflation much for the last 20 years of doing this, okay? But now we're in a situation where inflation's come back and bit us a little bit, so. Of inflation, deflation, we actually were in some deflationary environments there for a while. And the Fed actually worries more about deflation than they do inflation, believe it or not. And that's, if you go back to the Great Depression back in the 30s, we were in a big time deflationary mode, and that was nasty. And so they worry about deflation more than they do inflation. What would they do? They'd flood the market. If we were experiencing some deflation, they'd flood the market with money. How can they do that? You know, there's different ways that they can do that. Typically what they would do is buy up, Apple owns a bunch of government bonds, right? Okay, because that's their investment, that's what they're doing with their excess cash. Well, the government comes in if there's deflation and they buy those bonds from Apple maybe. That's a poor example because Apple might not sell. But there's other investors out there that have those bonds, and so they buy those bonds back. And then the investors have that cash, and what do they do with that? Presumably then they go and seek other things. It creates some demand, kind of giving you a little more probably economics there than what you want for second day of class. But cost of capital, again, we weigh the debt and equity thing, and we'll go through some weighted average cost of capital equations a little later in the semester. Now we're back to this. This one, this one was actually from 15 years ago probably, but oh,
That was like 3 months ago.
I know it, but about 12 or 15 years ago, we had a spike back then too, where the price of gasoline got up to about $4 or whatever. And so, you know, this was from that era, but now it's very true again, right? We're back to paying a whole lot for gasoline, you know, even though it's come down a little bit here lately, it's still almost twice what it was, you know, a couple years ago. So,
And it shouldn't be just that bad.
oh,
Charlie works for CHS, he knows what the price.
price of barrel, yeah, it's.
275.
It's, yeah. The problem right now is refining capacity and whatnot, a lot of that, so they're having a tough time, you know, refining it as quickly as they should. So, there's a fire, Indiana, yeah, yep. Yeah, so that doesn't help when you start shutting down some refineries. And part of that is, I don't think there's been a new refinery built in the United States because the regulations are so difficult to comply with. There hasn't been a refinery built for like 50, 30 years or something. It's some crazy number. That doesn't mean that they haven't updated the refineries that are in existence. They can do that, okay? And so a lot of them have increased their capacity and done those types of things, but we don't have any new ones, you know, that have been built. So that's an issue. This is talking about this recent financial crisis. This is actually talking about 2007, 8, 9, the Great Recession that we had. So it was an unwarranted extension of credit. We had subprime loans, right? Mortgage loans at that time. People were borrowing money and banks were lending money like son of a gun to get anybody and everybody to buy a house. Okay, if you had a pulse, you could buy a house, basically, is what it amounted to. Even though, that was not typical, that wasn't long-standing. Then banks and other lending institutions would package those into what they called mortgage-backed securities. Okay, mortgage-backed securities then would be sold in lots of like 100 million. Apple, those types of places would buy those as investments. Well, guess what? People started defaulting on those real estate loans. Those mortgage-backed securities became worthless. There was mark-to-market stuff going on. Again, I could teach a whole semester or two about the mistakes that were made in the financial crisis back then and what happened. And of course, there was lots of bailouts and stuff and different things that happened. So that was kind of a frightening time. It was really kind of a weird time when those things started to fail, because there was a lot of big banks that were technically insolvent, and the government did come in. And they were insolvent because the value of those mortgage-backed securities decreased far greater than what the actual decrease should have been, if that makes sense. And that, again, that gets back to a mark-to-market thing that was kind of a weird thing. Our stock market then fell about 50%, if I remember, 40 or 50%. So that was a great time to buy. And they had, the credit default swaps and things like that, which I never did. I read up about those quite a bit, and I still never really understood them a lot, but it was what I think my buddy told me. It'd be like buying insurance on your neighbor's house and then burning it down or something like that. So it's kind of a weird thing, yeah. They did create some new regulations, the Consumer Protection Financial, I think it's coming up here. It will be coming up. But the Dodd-Frank Act, I call it Frank and Dodd, because it was, I don't know, it got to be a little bit crazy, and there's some more things coming out that I think are getting even crazier. And a lot of this, again, was just that stupid thing of some subprime mortgages that led to it. So there was one bad thing that happened. A lot of that was because of the government itself's push, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, their push to get anybody and everybody into a house, and that's, when that all fell apart, that's the thing that needed to be fixed. But of course, we ended up with lots of other regulations and rules and all that other stuff. Orderly bankruptcy or liquidation of non-bank financial companies, so investment companies, those types of things. I don't think any of this is on your quiz or anything. The Volcker Rule did come along, and that was one of the good things that came out of that a little bit. Back in the old days, banks were absolutely prohibited from making certain investments, okay? And being involved in other businesses and things like that. Banks were to take in deposits and lend money. And part of that was because the government insured that, right? We have FDIC insurance, okay? And so that was there. They started to relax that quite a bit, 30, 40 years ago. They started to relax that, and part of that relaxation is what ended up causing that subprime mortgage thing, because they were getting into some other investments and different things. And the Volcker Rule kind of came back and said, we're going to separate these things out a little bit. So some of your big banks like Goldman Sachs and those places, they've got this investment part of the bank here, okay, and then they've got the banking part of the thing here. Well, the bank's federally insured, right? Okay, and their deposits are supposed to be federally insured, okay? But this side of Goldman Sachs, the investment side, just went through hell, okay, when the financial crisis hit, and that was jeopardizing the deposit side that was federally insured. So they kind of went back and said, we're going to put some safeguards in there a little bit. There's still, Goldman Sachs still does that. They still have an investment thing and whatnot, but I think there's a clearer separation of those duties or those things that the companies can do. The Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, that's the one that's there. This one's making me a little bit nervous because we're starting to see I'll give you an example, and it's in the energy thing again. We're seeing Congress put some pressure on this particular agency to tell banks that they shouldn't lend money to fossil fuel producers, okay? I don't know that that was the intent of this law when it was passed, but we're seeing it kind of move in that direction. Now, fortunately, the Supreme Court just made a ruling, this was the EPA, but it may start applying to these types of things, that some of those regulatory things are a little bit of an overreach by the government, and, yeah.
Like California telling people that they'll money to buy gas cars.
Yeah, California can do that, they can
And
ban
Virginia's
this,
attached to that, so whatever California does, Virginia.
and Virginia's trying to, well, yeah, Virginia's trying to change that now, because that was a prior administration. But there are 13 or 14 other states that have followed California already, that, yeah. Huh? California? Oh, Washington, yeah, they're followed, Oregon, Illinois, then quite a few on the east, I think, too, so. Yeah, I don't know, it's pretty crazy. Have you guys looked up what the cars do, electric cars do when it gets cold? Have some fun, look that up. There's been,
Or when it gets hot.
or when it gets hot, but too, actually, what I'll tell you is, I haven't found a study yet that tells you what electric vehicles do when it's really cold. The coldest they went down to was 0. Shit, yeah. Yeah. And that, see, the 3 reports that I've read are, Consumer Reports did one, and theirs was at 0. AAA did another one, and their temperature was 10 degrees. And they did a study in Norway, and whenever you read that one, they always remind you that Norway is a really cold country, right? And so, EVs must not be that bad. And their temperature when they did that study was like 28.3 degrees, above 0. Yeah. Yeah, we put our windows down and I've got our arm hanging out when it's that warm, yeah. Yeah, so it gets pretty ugly when it gets cold, and, I'll let you guys look that up, but I don't think those are gonna work in north central Montana for quite a while, so let's hope they keep making. Or else maybe the technologies will improve by 2035, who knows, but that's quite a bit. Anyhow, that makes me a little nervous about this particular regulatory agency, because they are starting to do that. Of course, the internet's just been amazing. You guys know that more than I do. B2C, which is business to consumer, that would be your Amazon, right, or Walmart, or any of those that do those online types of things. B2B, and this may have changed, but probably 5 years ago, I think, when I was still looking at some stuff, B2B was at least twice as much commerce as B2C, believe it or not. We only see the B2C, we get on Amazon, we order something, or, some other website, and we order something, and so we see that business to consumer. But the business to business stuff is just huge, okay? That's companies, again, it's the point of sale thing that I was telling you about down at the hardware store. It's kind of a background thing. We don't even see it. We don't even know that it's going on. But that's huge, right? That type of commerce. New businesses, again, you guys know these ones better than, I got to know a guy, a friend of my cousin's over in the Whitefish, and he's an Airbnb millionaire. So back, he and his partner, they both had other jobs and whatnot, but when Airbnb was getting going, they needed people to do coding for them. So he and his partner went to work, and in their after hours, that's all they do is go in and code for them. And they said to each other, whatever we do, don't take any cash. No cash for pay, nothing but stock. And so they took just stock for payment, and of course, you can only imagine. I think he told my uncle not too long ago, he's down to about 30 million left in Airbnb stock, so. Yeah. We're
It's all on paper, though, it's not real money.
you'd have to pay a lot of taxes on it, because it'd all be just about all capital gains, so you'd have to pay quite a bit of tax on it, so. But it'd still be, even if you paid the capital gains on it, you'd still probably have 20 million at least, so. That's real money. You can do a lot with that, so. yeah, the whole economy's changing and how we pay for things and doing those types of things. You guys probably use your phones and pay for things using your phone, right? Which I don't understand. I don't have a clue how any of that stuff works. You know, that's kind of beyond me. Um, but yeah, it's allowing, you know, cash to go from buyer to seller, you know, way quicker. You know, we used to write checks. Gosh, have you guys ever, have any, not you, Mary Ann, but anybody else, the rest of you guys ever written a check? Oh, you still write some checks occasionally? Okay. That's kind of, I didn't know if they were completely gone or not, but I mean, I've gone from, you know, there was probably a time when we had to write 30 or 40 checks a month, you know, and now you write a couple, you know, maybe 3 or 4 or something to pay your, you know, and we could set those up to be paid, you know, automatically too if we really wanted to, but we're a little old fashioned, you know, you kind of like to see it, kind of like to record it. We do, you know, so. I think these are posted too, so you can go look at them. The,
Flow of the class report.
you know, that's, I mean, costs have continually gone up, but believe me, they would have gone up a lot more in the last couple decades if we didn't develop these technologies to really manage a lot. It gets back to that inventory management, just-in-time inventory, you know, having two products on the shelf instead of 10 or 12, you know, the investment that that company then puts into their inventory is way less, or, you know, maybe they can expand their inventory in terms of the number of SKUs that they offer, right? Which in turn would probably generate some more profits. So, yeah, it's phenomenal when you start looking at those things, so. Okay, allocate, yeah, this is what financial managers do. You know, we gotta make sure we got enough money, right? For current, but we also gotta, how are we gonna finance things, you know? Should we lease that new equipment? Should we buy that new equipment? You know, what should we, you know, rent it for a short term? What should we do, right? Financial managers gotta figure out those types of things. That's why, you know, Peter Kiewit and Sons came to us 10 years ago and said, you know, we want a major that's a combination of diesel and business. How many of you guys are in the equipment management? None of you? Okay. There's quite a few students that are going through now this equipment management, and that's kind of what they said to us. You know, we want folks that they understand the equipment side of things, but then they also get a little background in the finance side of things so they can help us make those types of decisions, right? A lot of laws, you know, right now, I think it's still this way. Generally speaking, if you bought new equipment, big purchases, you had to depreciate them over time, right? So you bought $1 million piece of equipment, I'm gonna really simplify this, and it's got a 10-year lifespan, you would write off $100,000 a year for 10 years. That's way oversimplification, but that's kind of what you do. Right now, I think the law says that they're allowing them 100% expensing. Okay, so when you buy that $1 million piece of equipment, you can write it off of this year's, okay, you can write it off of this year's taxes, which is amazing, okay, in terms of, you know. Yeah, yeah. We had, we were in banking years ago, and they did something like that for farmers and ranchers, and they let them write off like up to $50,000 or something like that of expense, some amount. And the accountants and bankers, we started calling it that. We called it the suburban rule, because every farmer you knew went out and bought a Suburban, brand new Suburban that year, because they could fully expense it versus having to depreciate it over time, you know. And if they had income that year, they were gonna write off that income. And, you know, they didn't need a swather, they didn't need a baler, and those were too expensive, you know, they kinda didn't fit. So Suburbans were the thing, maybe a new pickup here and there too. Yeah, the mix of financing alternatives too, that's huge, you know, between the equity and debt. And where do you get your debt? Do you go to the bank and borrow it? Do you issue your own bonds? You know, is it a 2-year bond that you issue? Is it a 10-year bond that you issue? You know, those types of decisions that companies have to make. Right now, 10 years, I said, are cheaper than 2 years. Okay, I can go out and I can get if I wanted to buy a 2-year bond to get a little income, I'd get about 3.5%. If I bought a 10-year, I'm only gonna get 3.2 something it was this morning. So, kind of strange. Again, it's an inverted yield curve. That seldom happens. Things they do daily, right? Credit management, inventory, receipt, those types of things. A lot, some of these are crossover into bookkeeping types of things though too. But, do we issue stock? Do we issue bonds? Again, capital budgeting, stock buybacks, dividend decision. Independence Bank back here or down here, they've bought back, even though they've expanded quite a bit lately, they've bought back a decent amount of their stock through the years, so. Capital versus labor, those are decisions we're seeing made. I see IGA just put in the self-checkout, right? And of course, yeah, Walmart has self-checkouts and all these places have self-checkouts. My wife knows how to run those things. I haven't figured it out yet, so I don't bother. I like to talk to. What's that? They should, yeah. Exactly. You go to McDonald's now, right? You guys got your smartphones, you order it ahead of time on your smartphone, right? So you can go in and just pick it up, or they have the kiosks in there, okay? So there's this push, and part of that's the labor thing, right? People can't hire, McDonald's is still looking for people, and everybody's looking for people. And so they can't find people to fill those roles, and so they're looking for alternative ways to make things happen, and that may be unfortunate in the long run, who knows? We'll talk about the different forms of organization, okay? I'll give you just quickly today. Sole proprietorship's the most common, okay? If you grab a lawnmower and you go down and you mow your neighbor's lawn all summer long and he pays you $100 a month, technically you're a sole proprietor, right? You should fill out a Schedule C on your tax return. Of course, you probably just pocket the money and don't tell anybody, but technically you're supposed to do that. And you'd write off your expenses. You could depreciate your lawnmower. Yeah, David?
Isn't
At $600, the payer is supposed to send you the 1099. Okay, so below $600, they're probably not going to report it. I guarantee you, if you're doing it for your neighbor, and they're paying you cash, okay, it's not going to matter. If it's an individual, it's probably not going to matter. If it's a business or an entity, then yeah, they're supposed to send you that 1099. Okay, that shows you got that kind of an income. So yeah, you're right, kinda, but you could do it for your neighbor, and they could pay you $1,200, and they're probably not going to send you that 1099, right? Because they can't write it off.
And even if you get a 1099, it's relatively a low amount.
There's 87,000 new IRS agents that are going to be coming, so. Yeah, and they're armed, so I might be a little nervous about it, Yeah, well, I know, some of us have more than what they'll have, that's for darn sure. Too many, my wife would say, but oh well, so, yeah, no, I would, if you get a 1099, I'd put it on my tax return, okay? If it's that little, it's probably not gonna affect your taxes much, so.
I think it's I think the form's called something.
Could be. You know what the thing is, it's not the $30, it's the time that you have to spend. It's unbelievable sometimes. I gotta do my mom's stuff here, and this year or so ago, and I get a letter from the IRS. It says, your mom, or trust actually, didn't pay her quarterly estimates that she's supposed to pay. What? And so I look it up. I find the check that had gone through the bank. The IRS deposited it on October 2nd. It came through the bank on October 8th. The whole works, right? And so, well, this is BS. So I call the IRS. I think that time I was on hold for 45 minutes, okay? And I finally talked to somebody, and he said, oh, with the pandemic and everything that's going on, we're kind of short of staff, and so, the people that deposited or whatever, don't worry about it, okay? So I'm fine. So I don't worry about it. 2 weeks later, so I get a letter from the IRS. It says, you still haven't paid your quarterly estimate, and we're gonna, we're gonna come after you, and we may offset your accounts at banks, financial institutions, those types of things. I go, well, this is crap. So I call, actually, this time I called, and you go through this series of things, and then at the very end, it said, we're sorry, we're way too busy right now, we can't take your call back another time. And so I called 3 or 4 times, right? And I get the same message, okay, they're too busy, right? So I sit down, I write them a letter, I put in a copy of the check, I do the whole thing, nasty letter too, I was pretty pissed. And, and finally I had like shortly thereafter, a week or 2 later, I get a letter from the IRS that says, hey, we're so busy, we got your letter, thanks, but it's gonna take us a while to look this over. This is about 60 days or 90 days later, I finally get a letter from the IRS that says, oh, you were right all along, sorry, But, so think about the amount of time that I had to spend, hours. I mean, just that 45 minutes on hold, but the other phone calls that I made, the different things, I had to go to the bank and look up, get the canceled check, do all that kind of crap. I mean, I spent hours, So for $30, send them the $30, I mean, trust me, you don't want to go through that kind of crap over a few bucks. And the IRS will do it because they don't care. They're getting paid the same, and they got guns now and crap, so. Yeah. So you got sole proprietorship, fairly common. Sole proprietorships are still fairly common, and a lot of times for those small types of service businesses that might be like that. The little coffee kiosk that's down by Vic's, or the Creative, what the heck is it, Creative frozen yogurt now, or that's down there. Yeah, there's that little coffee. It's probably a sole proprietorship, right? Why go through the hassle of setting up another type of an entity and the expense of setting up another type of an entity, okay? Aside from that, you can have partnerships, right? Okay. A regular partnership, a general partnership's a lot like a sole proprietorship, okay? So if it's me and Colin, we go down and we get a lawnmower and we go mow the neighbor's yard and whatnot for the summer, we got a partnership. We don't have to file anything with the state, we don't have to do anything, but we have a partnership, okay? Technically, I shouldn't say we don't have to file anything. Technically, we should file what's a partnership return, which is just an informational return to the IRS, and then we'd send a K-2 to us that tells us what our share of the income or losses were for that partnership for the year, right? Okay, so that's a general partnership. There are limited partnerships, there are professional limited liability partnerships, there are family limited liability partnerships. I think I've gotten most of them in there. So there's different in there, and we won't get into those quite so much, okay? One thing about both of them, both for sole proprietorships and partnerships, is there's unlimited liability for the partners, okay? Unlimited liability, meaning that if we're mowing the yard and a rock spits out and it hits somebody that's walking down the street and they sue, maybe Colin was running the lawnmower at the time, but they sue, I might be liable even though I wasn't even there. I might have been on vacation that week or something, right? Okay, they could sue, and not just the partnership assets, but our personal assets in that case, right? Kind of hit those already. Corporations, right? We know a lot about corporations because we see those. The big companies that, are listed that we can buy stock in, they're all C corporations, okay? Kind of expensive to set up. The liability's limited, which is quite nice, okay? You gotta have annual meetings too, you gotta file some annual reports, you gotta do some different things like that that can be a little bit onerous. It's not horrible, but, things you gotta do. But the liability's limited, meaning in that case, okay, Colin, Moen, Rockets person, they sue, they can still sue the corporation, and they could take the corporation down, okay? But they can't come after the personal assets that Colin and I have, other than maybe our interest then that we had in the corporation itself, okay? So to be limited to our investment that we had in the corporation. Otherwise, they can't come after our personal assets. There's some legal, occasionally they'll do something they call pierce the corporate veil, but it's very, very unusual for that to happen. So corporations can be, eternal. They can go on and on, okay? So if Colin and I died, somebody else inherits the shares and the corporation continues, right? Easily divisible, yeah. Disadvantages, double taxation. Well, what do we mean by double taxation? Well, the corporation's gotta pay taxes, right? Okay, the corporations get taxed. And then if the corporation pays us a dividend or does a stock buyback, we're gonna have to pay taxes on that as well, okay? And so that's what we call double taxation, okay? You can, however, you can form what's called an S corporation. Now, you're limited in the number of shareholders that you can have in an S corporation. So these big corporations that we see and know, they're not S corporations, they're C corps, okay, because you're limited in the number of shareholders you can have. But an S corporation can choose, you still have the limited liability, but they can choose to be taxed like a partnership, okay? So it would eliminate that double taxation thing. It gets to be a little bit confusing. I think we do a few exercises throughout the year where we'll talk about those things. The LLC is becoming increasingly popular. It has through the years. When I was in banking, they were brand new. I was kind of freaked out the first time somebody came in and they had an LLC. And now an LLC to me would be second nature because there's so many small businesses, especially that form LLCs, limited liability company, not corporation, limited liability company. It's kind of a hybrid. It's kind of got the advantages of a corporation and the advantages of a partnership, kind of all in one, okay? You still got some setup, okay, and you still might have to file some forms here and there, but you don't have to meet monthly and, you know, different things. And instead of stockholders, you have members. You know, you have members of an LLC instead of stockholders. So it's become very, very popular, and a lot, especially small businesses, will do LLCs. We in this country, by that I mean Montana. There's a ton of farms and ranches that still do the C corporation. Now, there's a specific reason for that because there's a little loophole in there that, okay, if you're mom and dad and you're farming, you put everything into a C corporation. Well, guess what? You need to be on that farm to make sure that nobody comes and robs it or vandalizes it like they just did south of Chinook out there. Did you guys read about that? Oh my God. Okay, so you got to be out there on the farm to protect all that stuff. So guess what? The corporation can pay for all your living expenses, and you can write all those off. And so we see a lot of corporations, C corporations, even though LLC might be a little bit simpler, you'll still see a lot of C corporations set up for farm and ranches. So kind of a little aside. I told you sometimes I get a little distracted. So agency theory talks about owners and the people that actually run the company, right? So in big companies, you know, typically the owner isn't the one running it. You know, Berkshire Hathaway is still kind of an exception, but there's other owners of Berkshire Hathaway, right? Okay, besides just Warren Buffett, okay? But the agency, the people that run it, they have an obligation to run it to the best interest of the shareholders, et cetera. What's an institutional investor? Anybody got any mutual funds? You do for sure in your 401k. Okay. You've heard of mutual funds. Have you heard of ETFs? Okay. Exchange traded funds, those types of things. They're very, very similar. Okay. You've heard of investment companies like Vanguard, haven't you? Fidelity, T. Rowe Price. Okay. Those are institutional investors. So you set up a mutual fund with Vanguard, Fidelity, you know, Interactive Brokers, whatever the case may be. They're accumulating all that. This whole class, we might have it in, you know, Fidelity's XYZ fund or whatever, and then they invest that into companies. They can have sometimes a lot of influence on what goes on because, you know, Vanguard manages trillions of dollars in assets. Well, you know, they might be a major shareholder then of company X over here, and they can sometimes then go to company X and say, you know, we kind of like to see you guys run things a little differently. So they can have some influence there, which is kind of interesting. ESG, I added this. I don't think it's on your quiz. I just added it. This has become a new thing. Environment, social governance, and in fact, if you go to, I don't think I'll have time, maybe on Tuesday if you remind me, we'll go look at the site that I've used in the past quite a bit. I think it's Morningstar and FINRA are the two sites that I like to. You guys will use those probably for your second project. And right now, the thing that pops up, and this only happened in the last year or so, is an ESG score. Okay, so they're scoring corporations on how this Morningstar or whatever thinks that this company does environment, social, and governance. So are they environmentally friendly? You know, are they socially responsible? And do they have good corporate governance? Those three things. it kind of makes me ill, okay? And I say that because I'm an old Milton Friedman fan, and I can show you a great piece that Milton Friedman wrote. I used to have it. I think I cleaned it out of my office. Sorry, but I could probably find it. He wrote a piece, in a couple pages is all, and he said, corporations should be there to make money only for the shareholders. If governments want to pass laws for the environment, if they want to pass laws, social things, that's fine, and the corporation should comply with those laws. But when you go to work every day, you should be there to make money for your shareholders. Okay, that was Milton Friedman's argument, and I like Milton Friedman, so. Sarbanes-Oxley, we won't spend much time talking about Sarbanes-Oxley in this class. Business law, you should have talked about that there, I would hope. If you had it from me, we talked about it, yeah, so. Again, there's some real interesting things, and we might see it when we do our project 2 they're going on. The SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, for companies that have to report, that they're publicly traded, okay, they have to report certain financial things, right? Okay. The IRS then is what they have to report to pay their taxes. The way they are required to report are two different things. And so it's kind of interesting because you will see adjustments oftentimes on this SEC report to reflect what they're going to have to show on their IRS report, and then sometimes kind of vice versa. And it can be really confusing. When the tax laws changed, Trump's first or second year, whatever that was, and the tax laws changed, there were some whoppers that came out. It drove me crazy trying to figure it out for a while, and finally I kind of figured out what was going on. I doubt you guys will run into that now on Project 2 because we haven't had any major tax law changes where you'll see some of those huge adjustments, but it was interesting. So, of course, maximizing shareholder wealth. That's again, to me, that's what, if I'm investing in a company, that's what I want them to do is make me richer. All those other things are nice, don't get me wrong, it's great, but I don't think that should be their responsibility when they get up to work in the morning, so. The ultimate measure of performance, how earnings are valued by investors, something called the price-earnings ratio. It's not an apples-to-apples comparison, okay, but we'll look at that when we do Project 2 quite a bit. We're gonna look at risks, okay? Yeah, I know I'm about out of time, so. But growth, growth's a huge thing. There's another thing that's called the PEG ratio, which is the price earnings to growth ratio that a lot of investors kind of like to take a look at too. Quality and reliability of reported earnings, you'll see companies have to restate every now and then because maybe their accounting wasn't so good and they kind of fouled up a little bit. And that's usually a red flag, okay? That's, again, that's what makes the finance person's job, okay? Big companies always, they got a CEO, right? Oftentimes the next person in line is the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, right? Okay. They'll also have a COO, Chief Operating Officer. A lot of them have CIOs now, Chief Information Officers, and those types of things. But oftentimes, if the CEO's leaving, the CFO's generally the next one in line. Not always, but that's often the case. Kind of tells you how important, that job has become. Kind of whipping through this since we're getting kind of close to insider trading. I love it. Go back to Martha Stewart. You guys heard of that one? Yeah, that's cool. Okay. Yeah, it happened before most of these guys were born, though. Probably the Martha Stewart thing. Oh gosh, that was in the early 2000s. So yeah. Yeah, I know. That's for us old timers, or new. Yeah. Yeah, but this, and I find this kind of interesting. Congress is not subject to any insider trading laws, and so Peter Schweizer's written some. Well, it's and they're often exempt from their own laws, and so yeah. Oh, Peter Schweizer's written some great books about it's kind of follow the money. I forget what the name of the book is, but he goes through lots of congressmen, women, senators, and how they've profited from decisions, that have been made in Congress just by their investments and whatnot, it's, yeah.
It was quite a list that just came out. Contract, we can buy stock in that company. It's okay for us to do that before it all.
Close to,
days.
yeah.
And 71 of these people did for their time, both sides of the aisle. So
Oh, yeah. No, that's, yeah, the book that I'm talking about, it hits everybody, you know, it goes through just tons of
I
them
need
that
to
have
get
made
friends.
money through that. You know, the one senator from Georgia that was at special election, he's only been there 2 years, and they said his net worth's increased by $2 million just in those 2 years, you know, and Warnock, yeah. Yeah, I'll try to. Money markets, yeah, short-term stuff, I've kinda talked about that a little bit, the bonds and bonds are short-term bills, treasury bills and those types of things are longer term, I believe, if I remember right. Long-term, yeah, securities, common, preferred, we'll talk about those a little bit probably as we go along. Primary markets, when a company first goes public, basically, or they're issuing new shares, okay, maybe a company that's been around. The secondary market is what you and I kinda know, right? If we go out in the market and we wanna buy some Apple stock right now, if I'm buying Apple stock, I might be buying it from Mary Ann, she doesn't know that, or Michael, or whoever, right? I mean, it passes through other people, and so we don't know who we're actually buying it from, but that's the secondary market. The primary market is, you'd be buying it actually from more or less the company itself, right, when they first issue stock, or sometimes they do some reissues a little later to raise some more capital.
Talked to my accountant, said I'm gonna buy 10 shares.
I doubt the bank will sell you any.
As per me,
Yeah, yeah. Because Independence Bank's locally owned, you know, it's a closely held corporation. If you wanted to buy stock in that, you'd probably have to talk to one of the current shareholders and get them to sell. Yeah, yeah. Even 10 shares is a little bit of money. I forget what their last appraised value was, but. Oh, there we go. I made it, kinda, under the limit. Okay, so Tuesday, again, we'll kinda get started Tuesday then on your assignments for you. I'll spend a little time going over Excel stuff. Looking at that, so have a good weekend. Football, 11:30 now, Saturday instead of 1. Climb up, try to beat the heat a little bit. It's high school football on Friday night.
yeah, so the problem this year, so it'll happen.
I'll be gone for a bit in October. I forgot to tell you guys on that too, so I'll be gone for a bit.
What's it look like? I got a book in the mail yesterday, but I didn't even really look at
I
it.
didn't bring it. Let me shut down here and